Today I would like to welcome Representative Alice Peisch to the studio. Representative Peisch received an AB from Smith College in 1976, a JD from Suffolk University in 79, and an MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government in 2009. Since January of 2003, Alice Peisch has served as the state representative for the 14th Norfolk District, which currently includes the towns of Wellesley and Weston, as well as Precinct 4 in Wayland. Currently, Representative Peisch serves as the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Education, a post that she has held since 2011. And in her role as chair, Representative Peisch works on matters relating to education from birth through 12th grade. And during her tenure, she has tracked a broad range of issues on topics such as special education, charter schools, school discipline, education collaboratives, curriculum, school finance, and virtual schools. And for her work on educational collaboratives, Representative Peisch received the 2012 Walt Turner Award from the National Association of Education Service Agencies. She was also the recipient of the 2012 Massachusetts Association of School Committees Legislator of the Year Award and the 2012-2013 Massachusetts Reading Association's Reading Advocate Award. In 2014, Representative Peisch was recognized with the Distinguished Service Award by the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents for her continued support of public education in the Commonwealth. And in 2015, she received the Friend of MASBO Award from the Massachusetts Association of School Business Officials for her work on the state's Foundation Budget Review Commission. Welcome, Representative Peisch, to the studio and the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I really feel every time I read through your bio that the term sui generis, would hang its head in shame when compared to you. It's amazing the depth and breadth of your work. So thank you for, I'm sure from all of us in Wellesley, Weston, and in Wayland, for all that you do. I wanted to start by asking you, where did you grow up? Was it around here or?
No, actually, I was born in Boston, but my family moved to New York City when I was very young. So I grew up in Staten Island, New York.
So you're a New Yorker.
As you indicated, right. I came back to Massachusetts for post-high school education, and I've been here ever since.
Right, and when you were in high school, for example, when you were younger, did you see yourself doing what you do today for a career path?
No, it never occurred to me to run for office, although I was always interested in politics. Mm-hmm. It was a subject of discussion around the dinner table many evenings. I vividly recall that my family, believe it or not, purchased the first television set that we owned in order to watch John Kennedy be nominated for the presidency. So it was a theme in my family, but more as observers and maybe volunteers on campaigns, but not as active participants ourselves.
So public service was something that was discussed
yes.
in your household?
Yes, but again, more from a distance, not as active participants.
Right. It's so funny. I had a woman in here a few weeks ago who said that she really wanted to be a rock star when she grew up, but then she chose something else. She went into science. And I said, well, that's sort of the same thing.
Yeah,
right?
For a woman going into science.
I know. Well, you are certainly a rock star of education. So what made you decide to follow in this career path?
A series of opportunities that presented themselves, that it was not any grand plan. I did, starting when I was in high school, want to be a lawyer. I grew up in the 1960s, and there was a lot of turmoil, and my father was a lawyer. The notion of constitutional rights and civil rights was something that was very present and interested me, and that sort of brought me into my legal career. Although ultimately I did not pursue the kind of legal career that I think I had envisioned when I was in high school. But shortly after my family moved to Wellesley in the mid-'80s and my third child was born, I stopped practicing law, and I was asked to be on the town's advisory committee. And that, I joined the League of Women Voters, which is what I think put me in contact initially with the moderator. And from there, it just was sort of a series of events that kept me in initially Wellesley town government, and then ultimately I did run for the state representative position.
And you had a lot of different positions in Wellesley.
Several. As I mentioned, the advisory committee. I was then on the school committee for a couple of terms, and I was the town clerk when I ran for my current position.
Right, that's right. And so in your opinion, I know there are a lot of important educational issues that we all discuss these days. But in your opinion and for your committee, what's the one most important educational issue that you see tackling this coming academic year?
There are a lot of different issues, but I think they all fall under the objective of improving the access to high quality public education for those students that do not have access. So while in Wellesley, I think, and the other communities that I represent have very strong public school systems, such is not the case everywhere. I'm not sure that one of the things that I've come to learn in my current position is Massachusetts actually as a state compares very favorably not only to the rest of the country, but also globally. But within Massachusetts, we have some disparities. It's often referred to as the achievement gap. And even in communities with high-performing schools, we do have gaps between our lowest performers and highest performers that tend to be the result of disparities in income.
And does that include the METCO program, for example?
Well, the METCO program is certainly a way of giving access to a better education for some students from Boston. I think the METCO program also serves Wellesley residents in that it gives our students who live in Wellesley exposure to a more diverse student body, which I think if you look at the world today is certainly something that is of great value. I think what I am mostly focused on is improving what's available in those districts, so that we don't, so that if we continue the METCO program, for example, it's for a variety of reasons, not just because Boston Public Schools may not be as good as it should be.
Right. So currently, so coming from that to the next question that I have for you is about Common Core. And I was wondering how you feel about Common Core. There's something like 44 to 46 states that are currently using, or have decided to accept Common Core. Some have rejected, some have wanted modifications.
Correct.
But how do you feel about Common Core in general?
So in general, I think the Common Core standards are a good thing. As you undoubtedly are aware, the Common Core standards were developed by the National Governors Association several years ago. And in an effort, because they recognized that across the country, our students were not performing as well as their counterparts globally. And so virtually, as you point out, I think 44, 45 states adopted some form of the Common Core. Massachusetts already had high standards. Back in 1993, when we adopted the Education Reform Act, one of the primary objectives of that act and requirements was for the state to develop standards. Periodically, Massachusetts has been reviewing their standards to make sure that they continue to be high. And in 2010, that was done. And the Common Core standards were adopted to the extent that they were equal to or better than our own standards. And we, I would say, tweaked them somewhat to ensure that we continue to have very high standards. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Common Core. You hear critics talk about how it was imposed by the federal government. As I said, it was developed by the National Association of Governors, not by the federal government. The federal government, under both the Bush and Obama administrations, supported them in that they believed that these, once they were presented, that they were desirable, but they were not a federal mandate by any stretch.
Right, and so to correct sort of misunderstandings about Common Core, for Massachusetts, does that, going forward, does that also address the discrepancies within Massachusetts?
Well, this is, yes, so there's the standards that are adopted, and then there's the implementation. And I think our biggest challenge remains what it has been for some time, which is we have high standards. Some districts are able to meet those standards. Others struggle to do so. And I think the challenge for the state is to figure out ways to support those districts that have a difficult time meeting those high standards.
And in your opinion, do you suppose that difficulty arises from a lack of funding, or is it a variety of issues?
It is a variety of issues. I would say funding is something that is something that one absolutely needs in order to deliver a high quality education. But money alone will not do it. If it's not spent correctly, it unfortunately does not have much impact at all.
Right. That's a fair point. As House Chair of the Joint Committee on Education, what are your top 3 most important issues in education for us as part of your the 14th Norfolk District for Wellesley, Weston, Wayland?
So since Wellesley, Weston, and Wayland are among the highest performing districts in the state, they're looked at as sort of the standard to which we would like to get all districts. I do think that we want to ensure that we continue to provide the kinds of supports for all districts, including Wellesley, Weston, and Wayland, so that they can continue to deliver high quality education. And I think it's important for in this environment. There are a couple of areas where I think we probably do need to improve, even in the high performing districts, and that is having more students ultimately pursue further education in STEM careers, for example. I know that in these districts, the students actually, I think, are reasonably well prepared, but once they leave high school, very few relative to the other career paths go into that, and I think that's something that we need to focus on a little more. And we do have, even in our districts, as I said earlier, a gap between the highest and lowest performers, and I think we need to figure out how to get those all students up to a high level of performance, so they can whether they go on to a 4-year college or not, I don't think is the measure. It's whether they have the skills to go to pursue either a career or further academic pursuits.
And I'm sure you're still working on it, so it's a little unfair to ask you, but I will ask anyway. What are your goals for how to implement these?
So there are a number of things that I think we need to do. I've been a little frustrated over the past couple of years in that we've attempted to enact some legislation that would build on legislation passed in 2010, which gave more flexibilities and tools to underperforming districts to improve. And we've learned from that that giving schools that are low performing the ability, for example, to extend the school day, as long as, again, it's done correctly. Additional time where you're just twiddling your thumbs is not going to help. But there are some really strong examples of how to use additional time to improve, and we have not been able to get that legislation through. So I'm hopeful that we will make some progress on that in the coming year. The second thing that I think is of critical importance is what's often referred to as early education, which is really, believe it or not, birth through pre-kindergarten. In Wellesley, we have, I would venture to say, very few students show up in kindergarten not having had some kind of preschool experience. The overwhelming majority of students here have a lot of experience with going to the library, being read to. This is not the case everywhere, and I think we need to focus on those students who are young, at a very early age, who are at risk, and get them access to the kinds of programs that we take for granted here. And lastly, I would talk about funding. While funding is, as I said, not the only answer, we have something called the foundation budget, which establishes how much money each district needs to provide high quality education. Most districts spend more than the foundation budget. And you see that particularly in districts like Wellesley that have the resources to do that. Communities that have very few resources, the state does in fact give them much more education assistance, but their budgets are, I would say, in many instances less than what we spend per pupil in Wellesley, Weston, and Wayland, but their needs are far greater. So we need to adjust. That commission that you referred to earlier that I co-chaired came up with some recommendations, and I think we really need to implement them over the next couple of years.
That's great. That's good to hear. And it sounds like you're in favor of STEM education.
Yes.
Have you been to the Wellesley STEM Expo?
I have.
And what do you think of that?
I was fascinated. This is not my area of expertise. I was an American government major. I don't think I took a science course after physics in high school, and I would never pretend to have any kind of expertise in technology, but I was really impressed and astounded by what I saw at that expo. So I think that's a terrific experience.
I think anyone enjoys walking through the giant inflatable whale and watching the iRobots come out.
Yes, the iRobots. What impressed me, because I think it was the first time I'd seen one, was the 3D printers. Just remarkable.
Right. I'm glad to hear it. It's so the expo's coming back in 2017. So the community is busy getting started
ready.
working on that. So how do you feel about No Child Left Behind? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the No Child Left Behind legislation was well intended. You may recall that it was a joint effort, a bipartisan effort. George Bush was president. Ted Kennedy was very supportive of the act. But over time, it became clear that it was flawed. And I know one of the areas was the way in which testing was used, and we had this peculiar situation where if your students didn't improve by a certain amount each year, you were designated as a low-performing school. Well, if you start out very high, you can only improve so much. And so in Massachusetts, we ended up during the Obama years getting waivers so that our schools would not be penalized for not improving at that rate when they had already reached a very high mark. Recently, that act was reauthorized, and it's now has a new name, the Every Child Succeeds Act, known as ESSA, and that adjusted many of the sections of the No Child Left Behind Act that people had concerns about. So this just happened this calendar year, and I'm still learning about it, and I know all of the states and districts are still in the process of figuring out what it requires and what it doesn't require. So hopefully that will be address all of the concerns that people had about No Child Left Behind.
As well as how to measure the rates of success.
Correct.
Which also probably has to be readjusted and tweaked, because as you say, if you're already at high levels, there's only so much you can go, and then the distance traveled seems like it's smaller than other comparable school systems.
Correct. And there's like anything else, it's trying to figure out how to strike the right balance.
Right. And so what does, having been a parent in this community, and with all the amazing educational background and experience you have, what would be your advice to parents who are currently going through the K through 12 school system with their children? And what might be perhaps the top 5 things that they should keep in mind as they go through this journey? Because it's a journey for the parents as well as the kids.
It certainly is, and I think, as you said, as someone, I've had 3 children go through the Wellesley Public Schools, and I think the most challenging experience is with one's first child, when you're not, at least I was not as familiar with how things worked, and also, as I'm sure you've experienced, school has changed quite a bit from when I went to school.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of things. One, recognize that like everything else, school is different from what it was, whether it's 20, 30 years ago. I think in communities like this, it's important not to overstress your child. At the end, I can recall hearing, for example, when my oldest child was in high school, from parents that had children go through the high school before, not to worry, everything will turn out fine. Right. And that's, easy to say. Right. And actually, my experience was, as I went through, my 3 children had very different experiences, very different kids. But at the end of the day, they actually, I feel, were all served very well. So I would just ask parents to. I think there's no question you have to be involved. I don't want to say take a totally hands-off approach, but don't get overstressed.
So 1, be involved. 2, meditate. And your first child is your experiment child. Just keep that in mind.
Never tell the child that, but yes.
Right. Well, the child may come home and tell you, well, I'm just the experiment child because I'm the first one.
True. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure that beyond that I have any advice, and things change.
Right. So and how do people deal with? I see that anxiety is a huge issue in our community these days. So as a parent and as a legislator, how do you feel about the rising anxiety levels and how to mitigate that?
I do think that there is a level of competitiveness that can be counterproductive. And so I think to the extent that you can help your child make good choices, support them
Right.
as they go along. I think there's a fine line between the sort of support and help and being overly involved and doing too much, so that when your child gets to the stage where they really need to be independent, they haven't had the experience that allows them to be.
Because they've been too helicoptered.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. But but overall, I certainly, and again, I have seen. In my current position, I visit schools all over the state, and I would say, Wellesley Public Schools continue to do a remarkable job for the students. And parents, I think, I know that they move here for that,
Right.
and I think that they should have that their confidence is well placed.
Right. Excellent. And so how often do you travel? Are you traveling once a week? Approximately.
It varies.
around the state?
It varies with the sort of legislative session.
Right.
So, for example, when we were having this commission on the foundation budget, we held hearings across the state.
Right.
So then it was, just that alone might have been once a month to various places. I get asked to come down and visit different districts. I would say that on average, I go to Boston more or less every day, but I go to other parts of the state and to different meetings probably a few times a month, but it's very unpredictable.
Right.
And then there are times when I travel, say, to Washington for conferences, and I was involved with the National Conference of State Legislators' study of high-performing systems around the world, so I actually traveled out of the country.
Right.
That is a very rare occurrence.
Right. So it's fair to say, with all the travel and the heavy workload you have, that you love what you do.
I absolutely love what I do.
And how do you keep that passion going? How do you keep yourself motivated to get up every day and go back there for another round?
Well, I have always felt that access to high-quality public education for all children would solve so many of the other problems that we face in this world. And being able to walk into classrooms and see children experience this kind of opportunity, who maybe a generation before would not have, is very inspiring. And so to the extent that I feel I can I'm able to successfully help promote that and spread that opportunity, that's very motivating. But at the same time, I do want to be clear that I do spend a fair amount of time in Wellesley, and there are many other issues besides education where this may be the focus.
Right.
I also spend an awful lot of time on our transportation system. Those of people who ride the commuter rail will understand why. And there are other issues that I also spend some time on.
Right. So what are some of the other issues? What are some of your hobbies and other things that you do besides?
Well, hobbies are, I belong to a book club.
Right.
So about once a month I get together with my friends in the book club, and we discuss whatever the book was for the month. At the moment, I'm expecting momentarily my second grandchild.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. So in the past couple of years, I have, in my free time, my husband and I spend a lot of time visiting our grandchild and his parents.
It's good to have people to spoil.
It certainly is, and it's I have to say, far better to be a grandparent than a parent.
Do you find
less stressful.
Do you find it easier to be a grandparent?
I think it's far less stressful than being the parent.
Excellent. And so, what else would you like to add? What else should we keep our eyes out be on the lookout for coming out from your office in the next academic year?
I think probably continuing to work on the things that I've already mentioned. Really looking carefully at the recommendations about the foundation budget.
Right.
I really do want to focus on expanding opportunities for early education. I think that is the one thing that would make a huge difference long term in helping students across the Commonwealth who are not performing well.
So one last question. So we have full day kindergarten now in Wellesley.
Yes,
How do you feel about that?
I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You are probably aware of the fact that Wellesley, I think, was a pioneer decades ago when it instituted the gradual full-day kindergarten here that my children experienced. I recall as a working parent when my first child went off thinking this was a nightmare, that I would have to adjust every couple of weeks to a different schedule. Over time I came to appreciate the benefits of that, but I think times have changed, and Wellesley actually was kind of behind the curve by continuing with that program. So I think moving to the full day was the right thing to do.
And you think it's better for early childhood development and education?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to. I think sometimes people mistakenly think that early education means students being being tested and put under a lot of stress at a much earlier age, and that it's counterproductive. Good early education does not do that.
Right.
And I think if you have a little extra time in kindergarten, so that by the time you get to first grade, you really are ready for the more academic challenges that the rest of elementary school will provide, all the better.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Well,
if there's anything else you'd like to add, please go ahead.
Well, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I would also like to thank the voters in Wellesley, and to the extent anyone in Western Wayland might see this. I believe that it's a privilege to have this opportunity, and I am enormously grateful to the voters here for allowing me to continue to do this.
Well,
so
you're most welcome. You're doing incredible things. So
you're very kind.
The community loves you.
Thank you.
So thank you again.
Thank you so much.